Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for a wonderful invitation and wonderful salmon. It was delicious. Thank you again. You know, last week it was, I think I spoke about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Was it last week?
Yeah.
Yes. And I'd rather not talk about the same subject. You will hear a great deal more about it at other times. But today I really want to focus on something that has raised many issues. And that is the Iran deal and its ramifications. Let me begin by saying at the onset that I supported the Iran deal. But to suggest that the Iran deal was the best deal or the perfect deal, that is not the case. That is, considering the circumstances under which this deal was concluded, was negotiated and concluded, it is much better not to have one. But having said that, we have to look at the situation that is from the Iranian perspective and ask the basic first question. With this deal, will Iran be prevented from acquiring nuclear weapons? My answer to that is that Iran will eventually acquire nuclear weapons. The question is only when, under what circumstances, and why. But let me begin this discussion first by suggesting to you what Iran is all about, in order to lead to the point that I will be concluding with why Iran will eventually acquire such a weapon and will become a nuclear power. So we have to look at Iran as a country with a very long history, continuing history for 4,000 years. Iran is a proud nation, has tremendous resources. It is situated at one of the most crucial geographic area in the world. And it has a very inventive, very creative population, more than 60% under the age of 30 years old. It has been a dynamic country historically, and its population today, with nearly 80 million Iranians, the majority of which are Shiite, represent much larger number than the combined Sunni population in the entire Gulf. So in order to understand the mindset, the psychology of the Iranians, you have to be in their shoe, understand where they're coming from, why they have that kind of pride, why they seek so much respect, and why they feel that they have the right to be the region's hegemon. And when you look at it from a religious perspective, you also find out that very few people actually recognize the fact that there are more Shiite in Iran itself than the entire Sunni community in the entire Gulf. That is 72 million versus about 53 million. So again, that's from a psychological perspective. Iran feels it has the right to be the dominant power, even from a religious perspective. Now, having been not so wisely, as a result of the Iraq war, Iran was given probably an historic price that has never been dreamed of, and that is being able to influence Iraq and have such a strong foothold in Iraq today like it has never had before. I want you to remember that Iraq and Iran, in modern times as well as historically, been always sort of enemies, or at minimum rivals in the region. As a matter of fact, the United States deliberately maintains a policy of a mutual containment, containing Iraq and Iran going back to the Truman era, to ensure that neither countries will have the upper hand in that part of the world. And this will explain to you why President Reagan and Israel actually, one supported the Iraqis and the other ones, the United States, supported the Iranian with the Contra deal affair. Because we were determined then not to allow either country to change the status quo. But what the Iraq war has done, it has revolutionized that status quo. It has changed a very dramatic way, and it is not likely to reverse itself anytime. Now, I want you now to put yourself in the Iranian position and think, where do you want to be? That is, Iran's ambition to become the region hegemon will not change. But how Iran is going to be able to accomplish that? So we have to look at the nuclear weapons not as a tool and a means by which to attack other countries, be that Israel, or threaten the West by it, but only as a tool by which to augment its position in the region, to be able to dictate, to influence in a very dramatic way the entire neighborhood. Iran has also another concern. It is in a very troubled area. It has a neighbor with a nuclear weapon, which is Pakistan. It is neighbor with Afghanistan, which is completely unstable. It has concern over other parts on the east side, so that Iran has, you might say, legitimate national security concerns. And certainly, Iran also would like to neutralize Israel's nuclear capability. But that is not to suggest that the Iranians would like to attack Israel with any kind of nuclear weapons, because they will know that the second retaliatory reaction will basically could devastate, if not annihilate, all of Iran. So that is not on their agenda. But why are they pursuing this? I want you to go with, I will take you with me country by country. To begin with, start with Iraq. Now that Iran basically dominate Iraq, it is critically important for Iran to maintain its influence from Iraq, that is from the Gulf to the Mediterranean, which means maintaining its influence in Iraq will help it continue its battle, and I will talk about it in a moment, in Syria, that is its influence in Syria, and through Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Mediterranean. That is, this is a crescent of landmass, contiguous landmass, that for Iran is the most strategic crescent and want to maintain control over it under any and all circumstances. This will explain to you then why Iran is totally and completely committed to maintain and strengthen Bashar Assad's rule in Syria. For Iran, Syria is the linchpin to this crescent. Under no circumstances will Iran sit down and negotiate a deal about the future of Syria to end this horror, the tragic civil war that has claimed more than 300,000 casualties, destroyed nearly half the country, with more than half of the population either became refugees or internally displaced. This is a tragedy that we have not seen since World War II. But if you were to ask what has prolonged this horrifying conflict, this civil war, you will find that Iran itself has contributed directly and indirectly to the prolongation of the war, because under no circumstances would Iran want to see Bashar Assad removed unless it can secure its place and continuing its influence in Syria beyond Assad. This will explain to you now, if these negotiations now about Syria's future take place, and when they take place, you'll find that Iran had to be invited to the negotiating table, because the United States, the European community, just about everyone throughout the Middle East understood that if Iran is not at the negotiating table, there will be no deal, because Iran will continue to disrupt, to support all the elements that are fighting against Bashar Assad. So Iran today has secured its position, its chair at the negotiating table as far as the future of Syria is concerned. And now you can imagine Syria will continue to be influenced by Iran for as far as the eye can see, or else there will be no deal. In Iraq, Iran's position is based on entirely different kind of calculation. The Iraq War instigated an old, dormant, millennia-old conflict between the Sunni and the Shia. This is a conflict that is going to be with us not for a few more years. I dare to tell you decades to come. Because the conflict between the Sunni and the Shia is one that is going to determine who is going to lead Islam. That is, Saudi Arabia sees itself as the custodian of Sunni Islam. Iran sees itself as the custodian of Shiite Islam. They are neighbors, and they are competing for the region's hegemony. And all for their own reasons. So therefore, the civil war, which has not been talked about as a civil war that's been going on in Iraq since the end of the war of 2003, there's been continuing civil war in Iraq between the Sunni and the Shiite, claiming nearly 1,000 casualties every single month. As we speak, this carnage continues. And that war in Iraq will continue as long as the Saudis and the Iranians will not come to an agreement as to how to end this horrifying conflict that is claiming the lives of so many and destroying so much. I take you then to Lebanon. Now we understand why Iran is such a staunch supporter of Hezbollah. For Iran, Hezbollah is nothing but the element, the organization, the institution that it is needed there to make sure that Lebanon remains under the influence of Iran itself. Hezbollah does the bidding for Iranian government. Hezbollah today is supporting and fighting on the side of Assad. Is provided by weapons, money, financial, everything they need from the Saudis. From the Iranian. And that will continue for as far as the eye can see, because Hezbollah also present a threat to Israel, and that's how the Iranians would like to see that tension on Israel's northern border continue from Lebanon as well as from Syria, without, however, encouraging either side, either the Syrians or the Lebanese or Hezbollah, to challenge Israel, because they do not want that to happen. Instead, they want Israel to remain always on alert, spend millions and millions of dollars in order to protect its northern border, basically in an effort to exhaust Israel, at least financially. Now, when you look at this picture, that is Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Now what they wanted to do is to go beyond this crescent and go into the Arabian Peninsula. And the Arabian Peninsula was Yemen provided Iran with the best possible opportunity, with the Houthis trying to unseat the government. And the civil war has been going on now in Yemen for some time. The Saudis, that was an absolutely non-starter. For the Saudis to allow any kind of influence of Iran in the Arabian Peninsula is simply and totally unacceptable. And that is the reason why Saudi Arabia decided to go in force to support the government against the Houthis. And that conflict is going to also continue for some time unless you begin to solve the conflict in Syria, and then in Lebanon, and then in Iraq. Because from Iranian perspective, what has been able to accomplish, what has been able to achieve, it will not relinquish, because that is a long-term plan that Iran has and will continue to embrace for years to come. And the fifth element is Iran continuing desire to influence other parts of the Middle East. And if it cannot do so directly, it do so through extremism, violent extremism, and terrorism. with the means and the ability to finance such a group in order to stabilize the area where it seeks some kind of instability to further its goals and its purposes. The implementation now of the Iran deal, what would that do? Iran deal, without any question, and its implementation, it's providing now Iran with more than $100 billion. Now, if you calculate some of what Iran owes and will have to pay, it will still net with more than $60 billion. And now it will be able to begin to produce more oil. It will continue as we speak. Rouhani is in France and elsewhere. Major, massive deals are being made between Iran and the West in the tens of billions of dollars. But also Iran will have the means by which to support its surrogates, its war in Iraq, its interest in Syria, its support of Hezbollah, its support of the Houthis, and in support of extremism wherever Iran feels it's necessary and needed. You need to look at it from this perspective to understand what it is then that motivates Iran. Will embracing Iran internationally, in economic, financial sense, in cooperation, in various areas, in aviation and otherwise, will that moderate the Iranian position? This is really the most significant question that needs to be answered honestly and truly. But how do you know? You speculate. President Obama correctly saw it and was able to make this deal. But this deal, however, it's necessary because it delayed perhaps the inevitable. But it is better to delay it. Maybe there's still hope, and this is what President Obama feels. Maybe during this period, the next 5, 7, up to 10 years, Iran will change its nature. Iran will change its regional ambition. Iran will become a part and parcel of the international community, and hence it will have no need, no desire to acquire nuclear weapons. I cannot tell you that this prospect is zero, but it's certainly not necessarily a promising one. And why is it not? Why is it not? Because I want you now to imagine that Iran, that has the capacity and the means by which to have nuclear weapons, it was under huge economic stress throughout this period of massive sanction it was imposed upon it. And for good reason, Rouhani came to the realization, we might as well make a deal, get the kind of relief we want. We lived continuously for 4,000 years. What matters if we wait 5, 6, 7 years to pursue our ultimate goal? You have to understand, for Iran to wait 5 or 6 or 7 years is considered seconds, minutes, when you compare it to its long and continuing history. They can wait. But now you have to look at the regime itself. That is, they can wait provided that the regime remain in place. This will explain to you now probably the most important reason why Iran will continue to pursue the acquisition of a nuclear power, because the mullahs, Khomeini, the Revolutionary Guards are absolutely determined to maintain, to keep this regime for as far as they can see. But the only way they can do so, it is by making sure there will be no pressure coming from the outside, be that from the United States, be that from the European community, or any other enemy from the region that can in fact threaten the regime. That is, they are terrified of many things, but they are terrified the most of regime change. And they look at Pakistan, and they look at India, and they look at Israel, and for them there's plenty of examples, including North Korea, and anyone would come to the same conclusion. Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, and India fought 3 wars. But once they acquired a nuclear weapon, there were no wars anymore between Pakistan and India, and for good reason. No one is challenging today North Korea because it has a nuclear weapon. And no one, in fact, can challenge Israel effectively because of its nuclear arsenals that's ready to be fired almost in a moment's notice. For Iran, therefore, to secure its regime for the long term, it wants such a weapon in order to make sure that the regime itself is not threatened. But there is another critical element to keep in mind. This is the Islamic regime. It is only from 79, that is basically only 36 years old. This is a 36 years old that hasn't been able as yet to consolidate its national identity under Islamic regime. Iran was never governed by an Islamic regime before, not once. But in order for the Islamic regime to consolidate and become a de facto in the life of the Iranians for as long as they can, acquiring the nuclear weapon under the aegis of the Islamic regime will give it the credibility, the strength, the respect, and be able to also identify it as a great power under Islamic regime. This is extremely important to understand, specifically when you take that and compare it against Pakistan. Pakistan is the only Muslim country that has a nuclear power weapon, and so does Iran would like to have it as the Shiite leading country. Now then, we have to, if we look at all of these elements, we have to carefully consider what direction will Iran take in the end. And let me just spend 2 or 3 minutes on the deal itself, and I went to deliberately backwards why I thought the deal was better than no deal, but it's not a perfect deal. The deal itself will allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon within the next, say, 10 or 15 years, if not much less than that. The deal has 3 major flaws. One, however the President of the United States described the inspection, how tough they are going to be. There are many loopholes as far as the inspections are. There are facilities, military facilities, where the Iranian demanded and the United States had to accept that there will be no monitoring there without prior notification, at least for 2 weeks, for them to have another week to consider it, and only in the 4th week, by the 25th day, they will be able to come. You can imagine what they can do in the course of 3.5 weeks. The next provision is that the expiration of the deal itself. That is, if Iran does not violate the agreement, it is going to expire in 10 years. It will have no pressure, no requirement. It will be treated just like any other member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran will be free to do pretty much what it wants to do, should it continue, and my feeling it will continue to seek a nuclear weapon. The third flaw in the agreement is what has been done with the facilities, the nuclear facilities that Iran has today. It has disabled more than 10,000 refugees, but they are there. It has disabled the Iraq plans to produce plutonium for nuclear weapons, but it's still there, which means the facilities by themselves, they're still in place. None of them was actually destroyed or removed completely. And I remember Kissinger saying more than a year and a half ago, when this talk about negotiation with Iran were going on, he said, no deal is worth the paper it's written on unless much of these facilities are dismantled. Some would say that President Obama was only too eager to agree to make a deal, and therefore he had to make these significant concessions. But here comes the final point that I want to make, and that is the criticism that the Obama administration been getting because of that is really not warranted. Because the assumption is that if you continue to negotiate and play tough, then the Iranians, under tremendous economic pressure, will eventually give in. My answer to that, no, they will not give in. The Iranians have been able to live under whatever conditions you might say, under the severe crippling sanctions for more than 10 years, for 12 years. And they will continue to be able to manage and suffer, because there's one thing that Iran will not give in onto under any circumstances, and that is its self-respect, its pride, and it is unwillingness under any circumstances to kneel to anyone. We have to keep this psychological mindset, because this is critically important to understand. This is not limited to deals, to oil, to airplanes, to borders. It is a mindset embedded in a long history. It has a deep religious perspective, deep historical perspective, deep social, economic and political perspective, and hence, this is a process for the Iran. They will go through the process. And the final word is that whether, in my view, will Iran get the nuclear weapon, whether in 10 years or 12 years, Iran, as I said earlier, is not necessarily going to attack anyone, but then is going to be in a position to exercise the kind of hegemony it seeks. But in the interim, those countries who feel threatened by it, specifically the Saudis, the other Gulf states, are going to continue to be extremely weary, extremely anxious, extremely fearful, and it is entirely possible that this will not, that proliferation of a nuclear weapon may still take place throughout the region. So we can only hope and side with President Obama and say, let us hope that he is correct in his assessment, that Iran will come and join the community of nations and become a peaceful country. I still have serious doubt about that. Thank you very much.
Professor, please don't go yet. On behalf of...
I'm reaching my water.
Okay. Well, when you come back, we have a little token of our esteem. That this was fascinating what you said, and I'm sure has given us all a very important perspective on what happened.
Oh, thank you. It's not necessary. Thank you so much.
Oh, then I'll take it back. Now, this officially ends our meeting. If you have to go, please feel free to go. The professor has agreed to stay and answer any questions that you may have, so please feel free not to go.
Jan?
Yes.
Can I announce my name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Audrey has an event coming up. When, Audrey?
On February 3rd at the Cutting Room. I believe Andreas put it on the website as well.
Okay. So that's next week.
Yep,
So
at 7
please
o'clock.
come here, Audrey, next week.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for this great talk speech. My question is, there will be elections in Iran on February 26th, parliamentary elections. and the first time two bodies will be involved in the elections. It's going to be very important. So what is your estimation? Do we expect more moderate to win those elections on February 26th?
Well, you know, the candidates always go through a process, and nearly 60% of them were actually removed from the list because of their openly moderate politicians in that sense. So what is the prospect then? There is a small prospect that some moderate may come to the parliament, but the likelihood is it will continue to be dominated by the extremists supported by the Revolutionary Guard and certainly Khomeini. Yes?
Is it naive to think that regardless of any deal that we've struck, that Israel knows exactly where they have everything and where they are in the process, and regardless of any deal, they're any way to, make sure that Iran doesn't.
You know, Israel, in my view, based on what I know, it has almost complete knowledge of just about every facility, nuclear facility that Iran has. Some of it, most of it is reachable. That is, Israel can reach and destroy if it wishes to. But there are some dug very deep in the ground, more than 200 feet, and it would need specific kind of weapons and bombs to be able to penetrate that deep to destroy these kind of facilities. But I wanted to know that, notwithstanding what Prime Minister Netanyahu says once in a while, that Israel will attack Iran if it's necessary, and it becomes necessary. This is more really of political posturing rather than real statements to that effect. That is, Israel will have to absolutely come to the conclusion that Iran is on the verge of pulling the trigger. Then Israel will preempt. But I want you to know that Israel today has 3 submarines equipped with nuclear weapons that are roaming the Mediterranean and the Gulf all the time. And Israel made sure that the Iranians are fully aware that these submarines are there. They don't know exactly where they are, but they know that they are roaming all the time. So any Iranian leader who contemplate for a second to challenge Israel, they know that that will be probably the end of Persia as we know it. Yes?
Yeah, and as I understand from your speech, that there is a change in Iran, because Iran, my impression is they have 2 governments, the religious with the Ayatollah, and then they have the president. And, there is a change. There is a change, a gradual change, maybe very slow, but what I understand is that the president and the Ayatollah may not always agree on everything all the time. And maybe what's happening now is by opening up economically and give the Iranians more access to the world market, that may empower the civil government over the Ayatollah. And so I was, if you would like to comment on that.
Actually it goes both ways. As a matter of fact, the Revolutionary Guards went along because they also knew only too well that many billions that will be released will go to the Revolutionary Guards. And they needed that kind of money in order to rebuild their armaments. I want you to know that Iran's, however big stick they carry, they really don't have the kind of military power they try to project to the international community. Much of their military equipment, be that infantry, Air Force, are old, 20, 30 years old. They have not been able to buy new ones. They haven't been able to buy spare parts to keep them running, to keep them as a significant force to be reckoned with. So the Revolutionary Guard, though publicly were against the deal because this is how the Iranians are going to play the game, Rouhani will say, you know, we cannot do so because if we do so, then we're going to have problem with the Revolutionary Guard, and if we agree to this, then Khomeini is not going to sign that. This is it. Negotiating techniques. People who negotiate know this only too well. You're going to have two elements playing one against the other in order to exact the kind of concession you really want. So the Revolutionary Guard put out that facade in order for them to be able, eventually, when they know the money is going to be flowing in, they'll be getting these billions of dollars in order to buy the kind of equipment which will only strengthen their position rather than weaken it. But to the point then you made, that is, even though on the surface you have Rouhani representing a government presumably free and fairly elected, and you have the Revolutionary Guard, and you have the parliament, and you have Khomeini. But under all circumstances, the final decision is made by Khomeini himself and whoever is going to be his successor. Hence, there will be changes, but are changes only to the extent that they are consistent with the Revolutionary Guard and with Khomeini. Objective, that is. Yes, sir.
We know that during Shah of Iran, Persians were very advanced in that region. And like Pakistan, they did not create madrasas. Iranians are still going to universities. They are very bright class of, like, women are educated, men. And those young people are not following Qum. The thing is, the movement started like 7 years ago when our government did not support it that. If they would have supported, it might have changed a bit. But don't you feel that it is not like Pakistan, that there are 30,000 madrasas that all are becoming like very, very Islamic rather than Iran with educational universities where they are very educated mind, although they are under the parda and whatever? What do you think about that?
Well, you know, let me say, you know, unlike the rest of the Arab states, by and large, Iran by far more advanced when it comes to education, women in place in the work. So there's very little discrimination other than dress code, etc. But actually, women constitute nearly 45% of the workforce. So this is very important to keep in mind. Also, Iran has been exposed to the West up to the Shah era, to 1979. They have tremendous Iranian as people, and those who remember, they have very close affinity and care and love to the Jews, to the state of Israel, because the collaboration between Israel and Iran prior to the revolution was extremely tight and extremely, the relation was very warm. As a matter of fact, much of the weapons and guidance and the Iranians bought came all from Israel before the revolution. So the Iranian, those who are in their 60s and 70s, and remember those days and remember them well. But in reference to the young people today, which is, as I said, nearly 60+% is younger than the age of 30. What happened now with the relief of some of these monies? Yes, they will benefit. But there is another side to the coin. That is, I'm now benefiting somewhat more economically. I can maybe live a little better. But that does not change their need to be freer people, to reach out, to have better hope, to have better opportunities, to have their job. And that is missing. It is unfortunate, very unfortunate that we have not supported the Green Revolution going back 7 years ago. But I am prepared to gamble my reputation on one thing and I suggest to you there's going to be another Green Revolution. And the question is only when. And that is because when you are not hungry, going to sleep hungry, not knowing where you're going to get your meal next day, you're going to start thinking in terms of how can I make my life altogether a little better. Do I want to live under this kind of oppression? Do I want to live under this kind of subjugation? young men and women in Iran are asking themselves this question, and they open to the whole world. That is, the technological and the information revolution brought the entire world in front of them. They want some of it. They want to embrace some of that freedom. They want to embrace some of this technology and knowledge and know-how and entertainment and culture that can be imported from outside the world. Not at the expense of giving up or giving in on their culture and but when they want more, just like any Westerner, just like anyone in the West, in Israel and elsewhere, who would like not just to live in their country, but they also want to experience what the world has to offer. The Iranians are no different. As a matter of fact, they are even more so because of what have they experienced in the last 35 years. Yes, sir.
Assuming the argument of that resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, would that in any way temper the foreign policy, in your opinion, of Iran? Or
In connection?
Well, in other words, if the dispute between the Israelis and the Palestinians those disputes were resolved, would that have a tempering effect on Iran's foreign policies?
I think my answer is categorically yes. That is, in my view, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, unfortunately, it's feeding into extremism, whether we like it or not. Israelis don't want to say that to you, they will not admit it. But I just want you to imagine a conflict going on for 70 years. 50 years of significant segment of the Palestinian population living under occupation. The young among the Palestinians, 72% under the age of 30. 88% of the Palestinians living today were born under occupation. You've got to remember this basic fact to understand their mindset, their bitterness. It is not a question of right and wrong. When you aspire for something, you aspire for it, you seek it, you fight for it, you want it. And you can do many wrong things in the process. And I personally resent the fact that when anything happened between Israel and the Palestinians, Netanyahu and his cohorts quickly say, look, that we are being terrorized. Don't call any of these things anything than plain, simple, basic terrorism of the worst kind. But not once, you will not hear one single Israeli who will say, is the occupation of 50 years has anything to do with this kind of behavior? And I ask my Israeli friends, how would you like to live under occupation for 50 years? And what you have done during the British Mandate. Those who terrorized the British Mandate and before the creation of the State of Israel with Jews with the best of intention because they sought an independent Jewish free state. And they conducted act of terrorism, but Israel will call them freedom fighter. But those Palestinians who want the same thing are terrorists. And I'm not going to suggest to you that every Palestinian is innocent, and that's all they want. Many of them still would like to uproot Israel altogether. But they also know that they can't. So therefore, resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, without any question, will have a tremendous effect on the regional upheaval, upheaval that is sweeping the region. It will not necessarily end the conflict in Syria, and it won't necessarily end the conflict in Lebanon, but it will certainly have that kind of repercussion where Iran will have no longer any excuse whatsoever to complain about the plight of the Palestinians. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in my view, is central today. If we want to start calming the region, we have to begin with trying to settle the Israeli-Palestinian conflict first. Yes?
You mentioned the second Green Revolution. How do you think that's going to end, the upcoming green revolution that you forecasted?
You know, if I was a prophet, I would have made tons of money.
Could it be
but I'm not there yet.
No, but could it be that it actually results in more freedom for the Iranians?
It could certainly result, but the bigger question is what kind of support it would get from the outside world. That is, the Iranian military, internal security are perfectly capable of being the most ruthless that you can possibly imagine. And I can envision a scenario just like what's happening today in Syria. But you need, if you have an outside intelligent interference, the proper interference, the timely interference, then you can make a significant change in Iran, even in Iran. Yes, sir. Let me take a question from someone who hasn't asked a question. Yes.
You said before that once they do get their nuclear thing together, that they will be sort of like a Cold War like we had with Russia?
There will be?
The Iranians would be like in a Cold War where they wouldn't do anything. They would just use it as...
Well, they use it to consolidate their hegemony in the region.
Right.
So the tension between them and Saudis and the other Gulf state and Israel will not necessarily subside. In fact, it might become even more intense. I say you can define that as a Cold War, but neither side will not make it any warmer because Iran knows it will be ending on the losing end. Final questions, okay.
I will ask you, Professor, that the first resolution was passed by the United Nations was that there will be two independent states, Israel and Arab state. So Arabs did not accept it. The first resolution, they just attacked Israel. So for doing that, but all the later resolutions come later, if the first one, 57 nations have not accepted Israel, so how we expect only Iran was the one and Turkey was the one who had accepted as a diplomatic relationship? What is the rest of the world if there is only Palestinian problem? What is 1.5 billion people doing but not recognizing Israel for 67 years?
But what is the question? Why the Palestinians?
Why, I want to ask you, why is that 56 nations have not accepted? 56 nations have not accepted Israel to exist. They have not recognized it for 67 years. How long it should take for UN resolution, when they always talk of UN resolutions, why they don't accept the first resolution where Arab and Israel state were to be formed?
Well, okay, you know, let me just say a few words on this, and I think we'll be able to conclude. The United Nations passed a resolution in 1947, which is called the Partition Plan. The Partition Plan was immediately accepted by Israel, and Israel declared a statehood in 1948. The Palestinians refused the Partition Plan and, in fact, waged a war against the state almost immediately after its creation. And they eventually, in no time, the war was lost by the Arab state, and Israel was able to gain more territory, that it created what we call today the 1967 borders. But over these many, many years, the 1967 borders became the borders, that is the June 4th ceasefire borders. And many Palestinians came to the conclusion, as well as the Arab states, that Israel under no circumstances will go back to the 1948, but that is the Partition Plan, but they were willing to accept the 1967 borders. And I repeat one phrase I said before, not all Palestinians willing to see Israel in existence. Not all Palestinians would be willing tomorrow to have normal, wonderful, great relationship with the State of Israel. But I can tell you from my knowledge, direct knowledge with just about every country, Arab country I go to and Palestinian I speak with, there is no question in my mind that if Israel is prepared to make the kind of moves necessary toward establishment of a Palestinian state, they will be able and willing to settle for it. The negotiations will be tough. The land swap problem will be tough. The future of the settlements will be tough. Secure border will be a problem. But all of these issues, and Jerusalem future, all of these issues can be resolved if there is a commitment to reach an agreement. Neither Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think Abbas himself today certainly Netanyahu does not have that commitment to really allow the rise of a Palestinian state. I can say this to you categorically. Abbas would have liked to make an agreement, but he is unable to make the kind of concessions necessary because he does not have the support of all Palestinians, specifically not Hamas. And that is why that kind of commitment, because if you're committing to do something, you're prepared to take whatever steps necessary in order to reach to your objective, to a negotiated settlement. But if you're not committed, when you sit and negotiate, you're going to play for time. You're going to find excuses. You're going to make demands. You can make preconditions. And that doesn't work. And that is why you see a stalemate, because that commitment is missing. And the final thing that is missing is neither side are prepared to change their public narrative to try to tell the people that time has changed. When in fact they do the precise opposite. They continue to embrace old narrative that has only been poisoning and victimizing each other. And that is the problem we face today. I'm sorry to end on this rather less happy note. But, as one who's been involved in this directly and indirectly for so many years, I'm always hopeful. Because there is no virtue in pessimism. And if you remain optimist and you believe that it is possible, it becomes a reality at one point or another. Thank you very much.